Oh, sorry about that.
Well, good day, everyone. Welcome to another edition of the Garden Hour with MU Extension. Always happy to have you all joining us as the fall and winter months progress. We hope that you're able to join us for our monthly Garden Hour before we resume our normal weekly programming in April. Um, I know we've had some warm days pop up in November. We're getting a little bit cooler out there. Just know that we are all across the state with MU Extension horticulture specialists, so we're always happy to answer your questions, whether it's in the growing season or outside of the growing season. If you haven't had a chance to connect with your local horticulture specialists, you can jot down their name or their email, and we'll show this again at the end of the garden hour. I do want to mention that we have a survey that you probably received via email. Um, I'll drop that link in the chat now, and we will also put it in there at the end of the garden hour. So we definitely appreciate your feedback on that. It helps us improve our programming and show the impact of our education to the state of Missouri. We also, in addition to doing this via Zoom, we also do it live streaming on YouTube. And if you go to our YouTube channel, you can find all of our snippets for the garden hour. So we take some of our highlights, clip those into snippets and put them in there. And we also have the full garden hours archived on there as well. So if you're looking for some winter viewing to keep your gardening knowledge going on, that is a good place to check out. So at this point, I'm going to hand it over to our moderator for the day, Kathi Mecham.
Good morning, everyone. We have Zack here to do the weather. Are you ready to go, Zack?
Yes, I am. That works for me.
Great.
So I'm happy to join the garden hour today and talk a little bit about our transition into fall. And it's been about a month since the last garden hour, so I think there's several things to touch on here. So I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen here. And I'll actually start by taking a look back at October to see how we kind of ended up with the month. I think all of us would probably think of October as a generally pretty dry month, but we did get pretty much all of our rain at the end of the month in that last week leading up to Halloween, where we saw several rainfall events. And so, as a result, if we look at our October rainfall map, this is a departure from normal. What we can see are a lot of greens in those light yellows, meaning we're really close to our average. So maybe a little bit above normal, a little bit below normal. And for most of the state, our October precipitation average is just above 3 inches. And so on the right, I've just pulled the statistics for a few metro areas here, and we can see all 5 towns here, our temperatures for October were above normal. So we saw temperatures anywhere from a half degree to 2 degrees above normal. But our precipitation, again, was kind of mixed. Some locations above normal, some below, but none from these cities that are more than an inch out of average. So the timing from the rainfall at the end of October was condensed, but overall we got pretty close to our average for the month. And so unfortunately, when we talk about drought recovery, we actually need above average rainfall to really help us out and offset some of these deficits. So this didn't help much with drought recovery, although we saw some small changes. And just to give an update here, October statewide, if we average all the data for the entire state, it was roughly our 30th warmest October on record. So state average of 1.9 degrees Fahrenheit above normal, and our precip was very close to normal. But if we look going back to April and look at the 7-month period since we've really been in a drought in Missouri, still trending warmer than normal. So our 24th warmest 7-month period during that time, and it's our 14th driest. So on average right now, going back to April, the state is around 6 inches below normal for rainfall. And some of that continues when we look at our year to date as well. I also want to briefly highlight that we are on track through the end of October for our 7th warmest year on record across Missouri, as temperatures have really been above normal all year. And so this map here shows, if we were just to look at the counties and not just our state, for that year to date, so January through October. And if you see that darker tan or darker brown here, those are some of our driest counties right now. So going from southwest to northeast Missouri, several of these counties that I've listed here in this table are on track for their top 10 driest year on record. So we'll see what happens in November and December, but several top 10s are definitely in play for these locations and for our temperatures for the state. So far in November, it's been very quiet as far as active weather patterns and rainfall. This map here is showing our rainfall that's been received around the state from November 1st through the 13th, and there's not much to see here. So a lot of white. We've got a lot of locations that haven't seen any precipitation. Those that have, really nothing significant. And so mainly less than a quarter inch, except for southwest Missouri here. And so as a result, we still do see our drought ongoing, but I wanted to, on the right, show the 4-week change here, going back to October 10th, because a lot of these positive improvements where you see the green were made after the rain we saw the last week of October, and then that cool down right around Halloween. So still some improvements, but we've got a long ways to go to improve all of our drought across the state. Looking at a statewide severity and coverage index that tries to quantify with a single number what's the extent and severity of the drought, we've really decreased right after that week around Halloween, and we're at our lowest value since going back to Memorial Day week. So definitely an improved position to be in with the drought looking forward. The other big story I briefly mentioned was our quick round of low temperatures and a really heavy frost that we saw right around Halloween in those first couple days of November. And so this was well below freezing and hard freeze, so below 28 degrees for almost the entire state. So here, these are our Missouri Mesonet stations, and the lowest temperature that was recorded over that first week of October. We can see even in the boot heel at the bottom of this table, getting down to 28 degrees, but our extreme low temperatures all the way up to around 50 degrees in central and 15 degrees in central and northern Missouri. So it was a short freeze, but it was very intense. Got really close to some record low temperatures during this time frame. Additionally, when we woke up the morning of November 1st and it was really cold, where our air temperatures were in the teens, we actually saw soil starting to freeze up, which is very early, even for northern Missouri, to see those soil temperatures go below freezing. And so these maps are from November 1st, and a couple of our stations up north reaching that freezing mark even down to 4 inches into the soil. So had a pretty big impact and was really a definitive freeze for these locations where the soils froze up. Now looking at those temperatures November 14th, we've kind of bounced back. And so our soil temperatures are mainly have been in the 40s, maybe touching 50 degrees in the afternoon, which is good to see at this time of year, because that's closer to what we would expect in November. On the topic of soil temperatures, I wanted to advertise a tool that's available through the Missouri Climate Center. If this is something you're interested in for horticulture applications or agriculture applications. And so this is our Horizon Point website. And so if you follow this link, it'll take you to the page on the right, and there'll be a sign up button. And so here you can sign up and put in your location. It'll actually send you kind of a customized email each day with certain tools you select. One of the tools we have here is that soil temperature. So this is where I've signed up in Columbia. I can see my average daily soil temperature and how it compares to our long-term average as well. We also have tools such as a weed scouting aid, a planting depth soil temperature, which is very helpful in the spring. So looking at different plants and what they need for germination. And so I encourage you to look at Horizon Point and see if any of those tools might be of interest to you. And so now looking at our current pattern and moving forward, we've really been in a pretty quiet pattern the past week, especially. So have seen temperatures above normal, nice sunny days. It's actually been pretty nice to get outside. And it looks like this pattern's going to continue at least for the end of our work week here. And it doesn't look like we have rain chances until early next week. And so the map I'm showing here is looking at our surface chart for today. So looking at fronts, positions of high and low pressure. And really what's kind of dominant is a large area of high pressure off the east coast of the United States and a smaller area in northeast Oklahoma that's keeping us clear, dry, and pretty warm today. So that'll keep temperatures warm. One thing we have to look out for with these kind of antecedent dryness, warmer temperatures, and some winds this week as well is the potential for wildfire. And so I wouldn't advise any kind of outdoor burning this week. Conditions do look ripe for fire potential. And so this is an outlook that's valid for tomorrow, where we see we're actually in a high risk for kind of a fire environment in northwest Missouri due to windy conditions and some of that dryness. And so until we get a lot colder, this is something we'll have to continue to monitor because November is one of our driest months. We receive only 2.91 inches of rainfall statewide on average. And so we can see with that antecedent dryness a fire risk. As far as our temperatures looking forward, we've been enjoying above normal temperatures lately. Our average high this time of year is right around 55 degrees with a low around 36 degrees. This graph here shows our different weather forecast models predicting temperatures over the next week. And so you can see kind of going up and down for our daytime highs and nighttime lows. But we see around Friday, our temperatures bottom out a little bit. It looks like we'll have a cold front that comes through. Doesn't look like it'll bring any precipitation, but it will bring more near normal or seasonal temperatures. So temperatures dropping off to maybe highs in the upper 50s near 60 and some colder overnight lows as well. Now, if you look closer to Monday through Wednesday of next week, we see those temperatures drop again. So it looks like a stronger cold front will move through next week. That could also bring us some rain as well with that passage of the front and changing temperatures. And so this is really our next rainmaker. It's still a ways out in the forecast where it's going to be difficult to pinpoint where the heaviest rainfall might occur and how much. But just to give us an idea, we can look at the Weather Prediction Center's 1 through 7 day precip. Looks like the highest rain chances for next week are going to be in southwest Missouri, up to an inch, isolated in a few spots. The rest of the state looks closer to a quarter and a half an inch. So right below actually our weekly average for rainfall. So while that rainfall is needed, still below normal based on the forecast. So this could certainly change by Monday or Tuesday of next week, but we'll need to keep an eye on it. Looking at the extended period, which goes into our Thanksgiving week. So hopefully everybody's going to get a chance to take some time off and maybe you're traveling as well. It does look like a cooler pattern behind this front on Monday and Tuesday will set in for late next week and into the weekend. And so look for temperatures that are likely below normal. But unfortunately, we're also continuing to see maybe a small chance of that dry trend continue for an already dry November so far. Looking at our seasonal temperature outlooks, so these were made on October 19th, so almost a month old here, but they still hold for what we're expecting at least for November, December, January from the climate prediction forecast. These look really close to an El Nino forecast. So we see above normal temperatures expected for the winter for the northern half of the United States. And then when we look at precipitation, we see drier conditions to our north, wetter conditions to our south, but Missouri's right in the middle for the winter. And so where that kind of winter storm track and the heavy rainfall events kind of set up and persistently move through the winter is going to be key for seeing if we're going to have precipitation really closer to normal or above normal, which could help with that drought recovery. And so I know now that we're on our monthly schedule, the next time we meet, maybe we'll have seen some snowfall. So I did want to pull out some maps that show some of our kind of snow normals for Missouri, but also the surrounding region. And so On the left is our climatological average first snow date. And so this is a measurable snow. So not just a few flurries that we see, but actually a tenth of an inch or more that's measured. And we see for most of the state where you see these greens, light green to dark green, it's usually the first couple of weeks of December when we see that first snow, later in the month to southern Missouri. But a few spots on average, especially in northwest Missouri, might see that first snow in the last week of November. So we're getting pretty close to that time of year when we'll have to check the forecast for snow. On the right shows our seasonal averages for really most of the Midwest. Less than 6 inches on average in southeastern Missouri, and in the boot heel, 6 to 12 inches from southern Missouri up to really the Missouri River. And so here in Columbia, we're around 15 inches for our season average snowfall, and higher amounts to our north. But we've looked a little bit about some of these long-term outlooks, and I usually give a caveat that especially 3 months in advance, seasonal prediction is very difficult. It's an emerging science and there's constant improvement, but it's still really hard to get a forecast right for an entire winter. And so in some cases, we can also have a little bit of fun and look at winter weather folklore as well. So I just briefly wanted to show a few popular folklore items. Maybe you've done these around your house or neighborhood this fall. The first being persimmon trees. And the folklore is that if you cut open one of those seeds and look at the embryo, depending on the shape, it'll tell you what type of winter you might be in for. And so the picture here on the left, which is from one of our MU Extension news releases, shows an embryo with a very spoon-shaped appearance here. And this is typical of a snowy winter where you might need your snow shovel outside. And so I have not cut open any persimmon seeds myself, but I did find a news story out of KSDK in St. Louis here, where they went to the Missouri Botanical Garden and cut open a few of these seeds. And so we see those spoons, could mean a snowy winter. Hard to say. Maybe it's just for St. Louis too. Another very popular folklore is the woolly worm as well. And so if you've seen these around, they typically have lots of different segments in their bodies. And usually there's a browned band, and the size of the extent of that brown band points towards a milder winter. So if we see a large brown band, mild conditions, small is typically cold. I've personally seen a woolly worm that was almost all brown, so this might point to a milder winter. But there's some other folklore as well. We look at cold and snowy winters. If you see extra fuzz on that woolly worm, or if they're in large numbers, or moving slow, or visible before the first frost, which I've noticed was common, that might be cold and snowy. So kind of looking at maybe a mixed forecast from our woolly worm. And also, we can also look at some meteorological kind of folklore. You might be familiar with this, but the old folklore is that the number of foggy mornings, especially in August, there's also some sayings about October as well, typically relate to a colder winter, and the number of fogs you see can sometimes correlate to the number of snowfall events. And so Columbia really had an unusual amount of foggy mornings all fall, because we had a lot of dry weather, cool nights with light winds that allowed that fog to form. So we had 14 foggy mornings in August and 10 in October. So no matter how you cut that folklore, we'll see if it pans out, but that would point to cold and snowy. Early frost typically signals a cold winter, but we were right on track, at least for northern and central Missouri this year. To the south, where we saw the boot heel getting in to freezing temperatures, that's a little bit unusual and quicker than normal, so could be cold down there. And then there's also a saying that sometimes when we see this seasonal shift, winter's opposite from November. So we're warm and dry right now in November. If that were to flip, that would be cold and wet or snowy, I guess. So just for some fun folklore to look into. And whenever you do see that first snowfall from the Farmer's Almanac, I find this one pretty detailed and interesting. As many days old as is the moon on the first snow, there will be that many snowfalls by crop planting time or spring. So look out for that one as well. And then real quick, I just want to acknowledge Evan Malone, an atmospheric sciences student here at the University of Missouri, for helping me look into the folklore and also helping to prepare some of the material for our weather summary today. So that's all I've got for today. Here's my contact information. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions. So thank you.
Thank you, Zack. That was so interesting. And we appreciate you joining us every week or every month now. And that folklore is a lot of fun, isn't it?
Yes, yes. And if you see any other interesting things around your backyard, there's many more folklore items. So that can be a fun thing to do in the fall.
Yes. It'd be interesting to see, you know, how many years it held true, you know, the spoon and the persimmon or what have you. So anyway, thanks again.
No problem.
All right, we're going to get started with questions. And oops. The first question is, I have some bearded iris that don't bloom much. Do you think they are too crowded? If so, is the remedy to dig all them up and replant half of them? So I will answer that. And I just want to say that, yes, they could be too crowded. Also, they might be suffering from lack of sunshine. So, but let's just start with the overcrowding. They should be divided every 3 to 5 years. So if they have not been, then yes, there's a good chance that overcrowding could be the problem. August to mid-October is the best time to dig, divide, and transplant bearded iris. In this case, if they're not going to bloom next year, you may, and we still, this nice weather holds true. It's possible that you could go ahead and get them transplanted at this time, but there's some different ways that you can do that, and I'll talk about that in a minute. And you wouldn't have to completely dig up and transplant. So that lack of sunlight, just know that they need 6 to 8 hours daily. They also need a well-drained soil. And just FYI, crowded plants are more prone to disease problems. Another reason to keep them divided and the right amount of inches apart. So dividing iris, they are, you propagate these through the division of the rhizomes. And so that's that fleshy tuber of the iris. And when you are transplanting them, you need to have at least one fan attached to the rhizome to have the best success. And that bottom picture is showing those fans. And so you want to dig up the clump, improve the soil if needed, and replant a few of the larger rhizomes. You can also reduce the size of the clump by removing several of the small divisions, leaving part of the clump in the ground. And that might be a good option in this case. You can also, from those extra rhizomes that you have, you could create another garden bed. And when you do plant them, the rhizome should be planted shallowly, and you could expose maybe the 3/4 of it underground and then 1/4 of it on top. Also, you want to space them 12 to 24 inches apart. You can plant them closer together for more color impact, but if you do that, just know you probably need to divide them sooner. Also, water immediately after planting. They're fertile. They are heavy feeders, so I would recommend, as always, a soil test. But you could use a fertilizer 6-10-10 if needed, and you want to avoid fertilizers high in nitrogen because they can encourage soft vegetative growth, which could then be susceptible to diseases. A light application of fertilizer in early spring with new growth, and then again a month after the blooming is recommended. So we want to try not to apply the fertilizer directly to the exposed rhizomes. So a liquid fertilizer might be your best bet. And I believe that is all I have. So we will go on to the next question, unless there were any questions about iris. I don't see any. So we will go on to the next question, and it comes from someone having a great deal of problems with deer population. So both on private property and in a demonstration garden in town. So is there any information on the height of the fence to be most effective to keep the deer out, and also a scent that you could apply that wouldn't wash away? And Justin's going to help us with this question.
All right, thanks, Kathy. Yeah, so the question, this was submitted by a master gardener. I think they were talking about home garden plants, but also specifically a demo garden that was in a public park in a city. So deer problems are something that we get questions about every year. You know, unfortunately, there's not an easy, simple, or cheap way to keep deer out of the garden. And with drought years, we oftentimes see a lot more deer management in our managed portions of the landscape. So when we think about deer IPM, there's a couple of components. Population management, that involves managed hunts. We're not really going to talk about that. Although I will say I was speaking to a MDC, the state deer biologist, and he said basically the population levels are continuing to grow. Less people are hunting, so deer problems will be continuing to get worse as we move forward. Vegetation management, that basically involves leaving very wide field buffers between forested areas so that deer feel less comfortable going out into the open, but that's not always an option as well. So we're going to talk mainly about repellents and fencing. So in terms of repellents, how effective they are can sometimes relate to how hungry the deer are. Rain fastness obviously is a big concern. The time it takes, the cost of the application. These products work best when they're applied directly to the plants. They don't really work well as perimeter sprays. So I tried to poke around and find some actual research on these repellents because there's so many out there, it's hard to sort through all the information. So I found a publication from University of Connecticut, a research document on some trials that they did. So I thought I would share some of the findings of that research. And so I have some branded products here. Just know that these are not endorsed or approved by MU Extension. This is just information from their research trial. So they had a couple different options. They had an 8-foot woven wire fence that provided 100% control. And I should mention this was, they were studying deer herbivory damage on ewes. So Bob-X was a product that gave 93% protection. So basically they had a control with ewes that were fenced off, and then they had weighed the plants at the end of the season, both the control and the ones that were not protected by fence. So this Bob-X is a combination of different materials, putrescent eggs, rotten eggs, you'll see that in a lot of them. But this one with these combination of ingredients seemed to do a pretty good job at protection. It was applied every 10 to 14 days. The second product, which applied pretty good protection, was a product called Hinder, which is a different active ingredient, but also applied every 10 to 14 days. When I looked at the chart of all these different products, one thing that stood out was the products that performed the best had the most frequent application recommendations from the manufacturer. So keep in mind, these were results from a single study in Connecticut over a 2-year period. Deer pressure can definitely vary from year to year, and there was only one crop tested. But the ewes, I guess, were one of the crops that homeowners in Connecticut had stopped planting because there was so much pressure. So deterrents, these are generally, there's physical deterrents in terms of scarecrows and things like that, but I'm not really going to cover that. There's not a lot of good information out there, but deterrents are generally, we call them these air cannons. Sometimes they're called gas exploders. These are often used in berry plantings and other orchard situations. You can set them to go off and basically make this explosive sound at different intervals. But for effectiveness, these need to be moved around the area, and the frequency of the explosion needs to change. But the problem with this in a public setting, it's extremely loud, kind of like a gunshot. So probably not somewhere you'd want to have in a city park. So that leads us to fencing. There's a lot of different designs for electric fences, but these are, generally not recommended in public areas. In a demo garden where you have visitors, obviously this would cause problems. So the two that I'm going to talk about are woven wire fences and plastic mesh deer exclusion fences. So a woven wire fence, sometimes the woven wire is combined with a high tensile wire. The high tensile wire goes up top because it's going to get less interaction with the deer. We have a publication which Eli dropped in the chat box that outlines some costs. This one is about 5 to 7 per linear foot. This includes labor and materials. These generally have a 25 to 30-year lifespan, and it's generally recommended that an 8-foot height seems to be good, but you could go a little bit higher to keep those super high jumpers out. These are generally constructed of 2 layers of 4-foot rolls of woven wire to give you that 8-foot height. These do have, they have certain requirements for post height, post depth, bracing on the posts. The next one I'm just going to mention is a cheaper option. This is plastic mesh deer exclusion fence, much cheaper per linear foot. In terms of the lifespan of these materials, it's kind of hard to find good information on that. But 6 to 8 years of field life for the regular, and then the heavy duty material could be 10 plus years. These come in a standard height of 7.5 foot. That's how tall they come off the roll. It's generally suggested to attach some kind of white streamers to the mesh to enhance visibility. I think that would probably be recommended on both fence, so deer can see them and you reduce the risk of a deer jumping into it and getting hurt. So those are the 2 non-electric deer fences that are basically recommended, have been proven to be effective to keep deer out. Because this is a lighter weight material and you're not tensioning wires, you're tensioning a thick monofilament line, there is a lower number of posts that are required and a smaller amount of bracing, but still, a significant investment when you're going out, hundreds of feet potentially. Thinking about fence installation, anytime you're doing digging, you want to call Dig Right in Missouri. You might also want to check with your local zoning ordinances or the park rules for this specific question. You're going to need to think about gate access and how wide you need that gate to be. You're going to want to have some kind of working perimeter within that fence so you're not banging around on the fence all the time. You can get your equipment around. You also might want to build to have room for expansion so that you're not running into a situation where the garden quickly outgrows the fence that you're putting in. Any fence, just make sure you're following the appropriate design specs. There's some good stuff from different universities on appropriately installing that. You'll need to figure out, is this something that you or maybe some volunteers are going to be capable of, or is it something that you need to hire out? And also whether you're going to be shipping those materials, or is there a local source that you can pick up from that will decrease costs. The MU extension guide sheet that we dropped in the chat there, that does have some information on plant selection. Obviously, if you have an established garden or an annual vegetable garden, you're not going to be able to pick and choose what you want to plant. But there is a list in that publication of a bunch of different plants in terms of their rating of how often they're severely damaged. And these are just some of the resources that have been dropped in the chat box. So that's all I got for that, Kathy.
Great, Justin. So that's a lot of good information. I hope that some of it they can use and help with that deer population they're having. So we received a soil test showing the excessive P and K among other irregularities. This came from a composted soil mix with a local distributor. The question is, what process could make such toxic levels in a soil mix? And Eli is going to answer that for us.
All right, thanks. This is an interesting question. Uh, is the view okay? You guys seeing just a regular PowerPoint?
Yes.
Great. And so this person had the question that Kathy just read, and this is a picture of their affected plant. And one of the things I'd like you to notice is you do look down and you see the surface of the soil is covered in wood chips, whether they added wood chips or that is what the material that they purchased and put into their bed is made of. So the thrust of their question is their soil test shows excessive P and K, phosphorus, and potassium among other irregularities. This came from a composted soil mix from a local distributor. What would create such toxic levels in the mix? And so the soil test shows 131 pounds per acre of phosphorus, which is labeled as very high. And then it also shows potassium as 984 pounds per acre as excess. And so to answer the question, what process would create such toxic levels in the soil mix? Unfortunately, without going to the distributor and finding out who they got it from or if they made it and what they put into it, it's pretty hard to answer. But there could be such things as the soil component of the mix they got had all those elements in there anyways. It was already filled up with those elements from having been maybe a former barnyard where there was a dairy, or perhaps when the person was making the mix, they were composting a lot of food waste and they got excess amount of phosphorus, or perhaps they had a lot of yard waste in there and they threw in some fertilizer to help make it fertile, and the portion you got more of that fertilizer in there, so it seemed like you had excessive levels, these high levels. But the trick with this, with interpreting a soil test is this. So this is the soil test information. You can see these two, we're talking about phosphorus and P. You go over here on the right side, you have this ratings, and man, you see phosphorus is labeled as high, very high, and potassium is rated as excess, right? Like, I'm pretty worried. I'd like you also to notice that pH is at 7.5. And down here, you have the nutrient requirements where the soil lab uses a program looking at all the factors that they test in your soil of what they recommend you to apply as fertilizer. And so you can see they're not recommending any fertilizer needed to grow this garden. So that's a bunch of information we're gathering together. And so part of these soil tests is understanding how to read them. And so this chart and the descriptive factors they use to describe the elemental level in your soil, very low all the way up to excess. This is a relative level of each nutrient, as you see in section C, the second sentence, nutrient tested. And the important part, in provides information on the probability that application of a particular fertilizer will increase crop yield. And so it is a, you can't see the very bottom where it shows excess, but it's the probability of response to fertilizer when you have excess is none, and when you have very high is none. And so this information shows that although it seems alarming when you see your soil test, what it is really telling you is that if you apply phosphorus or potassium fertilizer, you're not going to get a response in your plants are growing because you already have so much phosphorus and potassium there. It's not saying that you have a toxic amount. The excess or very high doesn't say toxic. But you can see in the soil test, we do get some ratings of pounds per acre, as I mentioned in the slide before. And so then we take a look here and we convert pounds per acre. We have these same ratings, phosphorus and potassium, over to parts per million. And taking some publications that are on the end of this, you don't have issues with phosphorus toxicity until you get to 150 parts per million, and they're only at 65.5. So even though it says very high, shouldn't expect any phosphorus toxicity. And then you got the potassium. This is a publication out of New Mexico. You don't expect to have any issues with toxicity until you get to 800 parts per million. We're down almost near half of it. We're halfway for both of these below where you have toxic amounts of these nutrients in the soil. So although it's alarming to see excessive or very high, these are not toxic amounts. So you should be able to just take the soil test fertilizer recommendations. You got to keep that in mind that you don't need to add this fertilizer. Now, we are trying to grow echinacea, and our pH was 7.5, if you remember, and echinacea likes to grow at 6 to 6.5. So I would look at trying to think about how to reduce the pH. And let's say perhaps that echinacea or another plant is showing some signs of deficiencies of iron or manganese. that you see in the leaves, once you get up to that pH of 7.5, you can see that the availability, how wide the band is for the nutrient, that availability goes down. So I would think that I would want this person to reduce their pH so they can have an ideal pH for the echinacea, as well as be able to make these other nutrients more available. So we need to reduce the pH. And so it's pretty easy to do. This publication out of, I believe, Rutgers. Let's imagine he's got 10 square feet in that garden, 2x5, and he wants to take it from 7.5 there on the left. We want to get it down to 6. You just need to put down 0.3 of a pound of sulfur, work it into the soil. That's it, piece of cake. Bring the pH down, make a more desirable pH to help grow that echinacea and make those micronutrients more available. Also in this situation, what I would recommend to the grower, to the gardener, is to add leaves from the yard trees. Don't add black walnut if you want to grow tomatoes, but leaves from yard trees have very low amounts of phosphorus, less than 0.1%. And then we all saw all that mulch on top, and we know that woodies, it takes microorganisms to break those down, and the fuel for the microorganisms to break down the woodies is nitrogen. And so I would have some nitrogen fertilizer on hand, some blood meal or some urea. And if I'm seeing signs of nitrogen deficiencies in the leaves, then I would side dress with some nitrogen fertilizer and help fuel up those, keep those microorganisms fully fueled, breaking down those woodies, and provide enough nitrogen to your plant. The things that I wouldn't do, I wouldn't add Miracle-Gro. Miracle-Gro is really popular in people's gardens. They sell it everywhere. It's a miracle. It's 30% phosphorus. It will get you those blooms if you're low on phosphorus, but it's 30% phosphorus. So if you already have a high phosphorus level and you're concerned about going over, Miracle-Gro is not going to help. Manure is higher in phosphorus. Chickadee doo-doo, pelletized chicken manure fertilizer is high in phosphorus. Milorganite, human manure pelletized up from Milwaukee, high in phosphorus. Triple 10, it's 10% phosphorus. And then with the concern about potassium, which this person has, don't add wood ash. We're getting to the season where people are going to start warming their houses, warming their shop with wood stoves, end up with a lot of wood ash. Don't put that wood ash out in your garden if you already have a high amount of phosphorus. And so that's what I think this person should do to interpret their soil test. I think it's important to remember on these soil tests, these ratings that we saw where you see excessive or very high or high, it's just an inverse relationship to the response that fertilizer will have in the garden. Here's a bunch of references I used to make this presentation, and should be some of them in the chat. That's what I got. Thank you, Kathy.
Thank you, Eli. Great information, and thanks for breaking it down like that. All right, just moving on. The next question. We grew Crumbacino squash in a community garden. One of the squash fruits that was laying on the ground was flat and had 3 leaves growing from the squash. What would this process be called, and why did it occur? And Debbie's going to answer that for us.
Yeah, I sure am. If I can get my screen to go full here. I got to do it from a different way. Let me move this around. Sorry, guys.
That's okay.
Yeah, well, there we go. Okay. So I titled this a strange squash growth. So this picture was sent to us. It is a type of a summer squash, as you can well see. It looks like it's pretty flat. And in the description, it said it was kind of flat. And then you'll notice that there are these petioles that are coming out of the fruit itself. She said that they were leaves, and we trust that that's what the truth is. Even though we can't see the leaves would be up here. So what is that? So what's really interesting is there are a lot of things that happen genetically or due to the environment that just has a way of making our plants look slightly different from what they're really normally supposed to look like. So actually what this particular one is it's called vivipary. Vivipary is the development of any type of a vegetative shoot that is on or among the reproductive organs of a plant. So the reproductive organs is what the key is here as far as saying that it is vivipary. Now, I don't know about you, But in a winter time, when we have those luscious, delicious grocery store tomatoes, if you cut them open, and I have in the past where I've seen these, the little seeds are in there are starting to sprout. That's vivipary. It is growing those seedlings inside of the fruit, and eventually, if they continue to grow, will come outside of that particular fruit itself. Here is an ear of corn on the ground, and you can see all the different little sprouts of those kernels that are starting to come up. Here's a hard squash, and we can see those seeds already starting to sprout. And this one here with the tomato, which is really interesting, remember, I'm sorry, with the strawberry. So with the strawberries, remember the seeds are on the outside here. And so all of those little seeds are starting to sprout. So that's called vivipary. Now, we have to remember there's another type of term that is called fasciation. And fasciation, that definition specifically means banded or bundled. And this is a physiological disorder that occurs in quite a few number of plants. And it's mainly noticed on stems, can be on leaves, but it's also in the flowers, the fluorescence. It also is a result that can look where it's really thick. It can also be flattened. Stems and large flower heads usually are the ones where that occurs. And so that flatness of that squash with the picture that came in made some of us think that it could have been fasciation, when in reality it was vivipary. So here's some fasciation, and you'll notice it's the stem of the plant, that the fruiting part of the plant is not actually there. Look at all of the buds that are coming off here that are coming off of that stem. So the stem again is flattened. It is not from the vegetative or reproductive organs of the plant. And here is a tomato from the top side, and you can see all the different flowers that are coming out, which is fasciation. Remember, we talked about flower heads that can grow abnormally as well as flattened stems. And so here are some other plants that show the fasciation, just so that you can get an understanding. So we can see that the flower head does look a little bit different. And it took me a second to look at the dandelion, and it looks like there might be 2 or 3 heads of the dandelion that are coming out in this one area right here. I lived in the Sonoran Desert in Tucson for a little bit, and I did see this kind of growth on the saguaros every once in a while. So that was very interesting. And then I just have some others down here. So this would be fasciation with the sunflower. This is going to be vivipary because, again, the seeds are starting to sprout on the inside of the vegetative part of the fruiting part of the plant. The summer squash, this is going to be fasciation because it's the abnormal growth of the flower. The apple, you'll notice here, vivipary, the seeds are starting to sprout again. And again, we have over here a very flattened stem of a sweet potato, which we call that fasciation. So keep an eye out in your vegetables and in your flowers and see if you see any of these growing next year.
Thanks, Debbie. Gosh, we really got some great questions this week, didn't we? We always do, but just real interesting questions. Thanks. All right, moving on. The next question is, can you mulch bulbs before the ground freezes? And Donna's going to answer that for us. Are you there, Donna?
Okay, yes. I had troubles getting my computer to go. Let me see about sharing my screen. Okay. Can you see that?
Yes.
Okay, so the question was about mulching bulbs, whether the ground needs to be frozen. Well, it needs to be cold. That's the big thing. So anytime the temperature is up in 70s and 80s and our evening temperatures are getting no lower than 40, I would delay. Just remember that mulching does quite a few things, but for bulbs, we want that ground to stay warm. I'm sorry, that ground to stay cold, Otherwise, if we mulch when it's too warm, those bulbs will come up, and we don't want them to. We want them stalled and keep them to where they're only doing root growth in the fall, and then they come up in the spring. So just to give a review, the mulch will help conserve moisture, help moderate soil temperatures. So if you put that mulch on when it's warm, the ground will stay warm longer. And so that's a big no-no. It prevents soil heaving and bulb root damage. And so that's why we want to put it on before we get a lot of freezing, because we don't want that damage done to those bulbs. And so it's sort of like one of those little fine lines where you don't want it too warm, but you don't want a lot of cold to be happening yet. And so in much of the state, we try to tell people mid-November to late November, that's when you need to be mulching, because that's when we see the rapid soil cool down. Mulch is also nice because it keeps it nice and tidy, and it keeps the weeds at bay. The recommendation for bulbs is to use bark mulch, leaf mulch, or straw. Those are the three things that will help insulate pretty well. All right, there we go again. The big thing, and once again, is don't mulch too soon after planting. So if you get them in the ground early November, you might delay by 3 weeks. I always try to tell people that let's have a few good hard freezes, and that's when that sudden cool down happens on our soils. And so that's what my recommendation is. It doesn't have to be frozen solid. We just have to have a couple of good hard freezes. Mulch at 2 to 4 inches deep. And the other thing that's an issue this year is if you apply mulch when it's dry, the soil will stay on the drier side. If you apply mulch when it's wet, sopping wet, then it stays really wet. And so my suggestion, since much of the state is having issues with dry soils and droughty conditions, my suggestion is water well and then mulch. But yes, it doesn't have to be frozen solid, just have to be cold. All right, back to you. Hope everybody has a fun time planting.
Thanks, Donna. What a beautiful crocus. All right. Well, it's that time of year that we're going to be seeing Christmas cactus blooming, possibly. Mine are not, but I'm seeing them in the store blooming. And Gwen is going to give us a little bit more information on the holiday cactuses.
Are you seeing my screen?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, perfect. Okay, I've had a lot of computer problems this morning, so I wasn't sure what was gonna happen here. So yeah, I'm gonna give a little bit of a talk here about the natural history and some growing tips about the holiday cactus, and I'll explain why I'm calling it holiday cactus here in just a minute. So first off, if we look at just the natural range and habitat of the holiday cactus, it is from South America, and you can see on the map here, it's kind of in the southeast part of Brazil. And so it's a pretty narrow range that it has. And the other thing that's kind of unique here is that it's in a coastal mountain area, so 23 to 3,300 feet above sea level. And it's an area where you have high humidity. So when you think of cactus, we don't normally think of humid, mountainy areas. We usually think of hot, dry areas. So this cactus has really adapted very specifically to this area. So it's kind of the opposite almost of what you would think a normal cactus would do. It is an epiphyte, or it's considered an epiphytic type of plant, which means that it will grow on other trees or rocks. It's not a parasite, so it's not stealing any nutrients or anything from the plant that it's living on, but it will absorb the nutrients and water just from the environment that's around them. So if you're thinking about having a holiday cactus in your house, it might be helpful to keep some of those things in mind, and you want to try to mimic that in your home. So there are 3 different kinds, and that's why I'm calling it holiday cactus. And we called it Christmas cactus for a long time. So I will probably still call it a Christmas cactus because that's what I grew up knowing it as. But I always wondered, well, why does my Christmas cactus bloom at Thanksgiving? Well, it turns out that I had a Thanksgiving cactus rather than a Christmas cactus. And you may have seen this image kind of circulating through social media, showing you the 3 different kinds. And you can see the Christmas cactus and the Thanksgiving cactus have the same genus, just different species. And you can see that the Thanksgiving cactus has a little bit, it has these little spines or sharp points on the margins here. Now, these are modified stems. They are not leaves. Most cacti do not have leaves, or they have leaves, but they're modified into spines, but they do not do any kind of photosynthetic work. So on cacti, one of the traits of that family is that they have photosynthetic stems, and that is a way to help conserve water in that dry habitat. So that's kind of following through with these guys. The flower color is not, it's just a different variety that you can see, and I'll have a picture here in a little bit that shows the different colors. The Christmas cactus, on the other hand, you can see it still has kind of this wavy margin along the flattened stem, but it doesn't have the prickles or the sharp pins that you see on the Thanksgiving cactus. And then we also have an Easter cactus, which will bloom more in the near Easter time. And you can see that it really has a wavy edge on the sides of the stem. So you can see the little spikes up here. Those would be the modified leaves. And again, that helps reduce evaporation. And it also helps protect the plant from something eating it. And you can also see the flowers on the Thanksgiving cactus and the Christmas cactus are very, very similar. And the Easter cactus kind of has more of a star-shaped flower. All right, so now, if you think about that, here is a picture of a holiday cactus. That this one is actually one that began with my grandmother and then passed down through my mother. And this is one that we have. And a lot of people can do this with your Christmas cactus. But if you look at that, which one do you think that is? And you might just kind of drop that into the chat if you would like. I'll give you a couple of minutes maybe to look, and I'll go back. Here's the leaf thing, and then here is this. So if you chose Thanksgiving cactus, you are correct. And again, you can see the little spines on the edge, or the pricks on the edges of the stems. And then we have another one here. So again, look at the edges of the stems, the flattened stems. What do you think this one might be? You can drop in the chat if you would like. Check yourself. And if you chose, and I'm going to say that this one is probably a Christmas cactus. I don't know for sure, but it has it's definitely not the Thanksgiving cactus, because you can see that the edges are very smooth. It's not going to be an Easter cactus either, because it doesn't have the star-shaped flowers. So the picture that I found this from, they called it a holiday cactus, but I'm going to guess with pretty high confidence that this is probably a Christmas cactus. And one of the folks may correct me if I'm wrong here. So if we look at the plant care, really it's the same for all three types. So if we look at the amount of care, soil, water, light, and nutrients, really this is one of the easiest houseplants to grow. So it's best just to ignore it. If you can find a good place for it, you can just kind of leave it alone and just kind of give it water every once in a while. So soil, you do want it to drain well, but you also want it to hold moisture. So remember that these are in a moist habitat. So you don't want it to dry out completely. So a soil mix that's 1 part potting soil to 2 parts peat moss or compost to 1 part sand, vermiculite, or perlite to help with that drainage. That would be pretty ideal for your holiday cactus. When you're watering it, you want it to keep it evenly moist through March through September, but then about fall time, you want to let it go pretty dry between the waterings. And this will kind of help a little bit with the blooming. The light, you want it indirect or filtered light in the summertime. I made the mistake of putting mine in direct sunlight on my south porch, and it did not like that at all. So you want to have it in the shade, but where it can get some indirect light. And then highlight in the wintertime. So when I bring mine in, I put it in a south-facing window that has a kind of a sheer in front of it, but it still gets a lot of light, and it does really well there. And then nutrients, since these are absorbing nutrients from the environment, they're not heavy feeders. So again, a 1/4 strength solution of a soluble or organic fertilizer when the growth starts in late winter or early spring, that's probably good enough. And then just light fertilizing throughout the summer while it's growing if it's needed. So the ideal environment is to keep it from freezing. And if you have it in a window that's going to be experiencing sharp temperature changes, like maybe a north-facing window, that might not be the best place for it. You do want to keep it in a relatively humid place. So maybe setting your pot in a pebble tray that has a little bit of water in it to help keep that humidity around the plant. And like I said, avoid your temperature fluctuation. And then this is also one that it kind of likes to be root bound. So you do not need to repot it all the time. And really, you don't have to keep getting it bigger and bigger. You just kind of, they do get really big, but you do not have to really, give it a lot of space. You want those roots to be pretty tight in the pot. All right, so propagation, again, this is super easy to propagate. These little segments, you can just kind of pinch those off or cut them off and stick them in some soil or your potting mix that I mentioned earlier, and they will just take off. Alternatively, you can put them in jars of water and they'll start to form some little roots down here. But remember, these are epiphytic, so they're not really rooted plants. They're just kind of living on and trying to absorb the nutrients from the environment. And then to get your plant to bloom, and here you can see all of the different colors that different varieties that you have. It's best to let your soil dry out in waterings in late summer, and then move it to a brighter, cooler location. So the Thanksgiving and Christmas cacti need about 6 weeks of short days, so less than 12 hours of light. So they really need uninterrupted darkness for greater than 12 hours in order to get that photo period right so that they will bloom. If you have an Easter cacti, you will need to have 8 to 12 weeks of short day plants. So you can either put it in a room where the lights are going to go off and nobody's going to be in there, from 7 o'clock at night to maybe 8 o'clock the next morning or something. Or you can use a box or something that will block the light. But again, you don't want that interrupted darkness to get the plant, because if you have just some light that turns on, it could inhibit it from forming the buds and blooming. And again, you want to protect it from sharp changes in temperature and light, because all the buds will just fall off if that happens. And I just wanted to say thank you. Hopefully this answered some of your questions about the different holiday cacti that are there. I wanted to say thank you to Kathy and Kelly. These are other state horticulture specialists in other parts of the state. They really helped me with the photos and some of the content in this presentation. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. Thank you.
Thank you, Gwen. That was really good. And again, the information is we've just gotten a lot of information today. We are really almost past I guess we're past the hour. So I thank everyone, but I'm going to turn it back to Justin.
All right. Thanks, Kathy. Thanks everybody for joining us today. Always happy to be able to present information to you and get to connect with questions from folks all across the state of Missouri. So keep in mind, we'll be on our monthly schedule until April, when we will reconvene our weekly schedule. So we hope that you can join us over the winter time. If you have questions, you can always submit those to the Garden Hour at the registration site. You can also drop in photos, and we'd love to have photos. Really helps us get a better idea of what is going on. Once again, we have hort folks all across the state of Missouri serving every county. If you happen to live in a county that says open, just reach out to your neighboring horticulture specialist. We're happy to help out. Always happy to answer your questions, or if you just need to pick our brain about anything horticulture related. So we always drop a lot of links in the chat box there for helpful references. So if you'd like to save that chat, just hover over the 3 dots down here, and that will give you the option to save that chat file to your computer to come back for future reference. We dropped some links in the chat box there, including our Garden Hour survey. And so we definitely appreciate your feedback. If you haven't completed that one that came via email, you can copy that link there and give us your thoughts about the garden hour, how we can improve programming, and what you have learned throughout the garden hour. So we look forward to seeing everybody next month, and I hope you have a great end of the week here and a great rest of the month.